We've all been there, right? That nagging pain in your back after a day of yard work, or the way your knees just seem to stiffen up as the day goes on. And what do? We reach for something, anything to make it stop.
It's a universal experience, isn't it? Pain is something we all try to avoid.
It really is. And today we're diving deep into one of the most common solutions out there, Diclofenac.
Diclofenac. Oh, yeah. I think most people have come across that at some point, whether it's the pills, the gels, you name it.
Exactly. But what might seem like a simple pain reliever actually has a pretty fascinating and complex story.
More than you'd think, right?
Way more. So today we're going to use the information you've sent us to explore the whole journey of Diclofenac, from its humble beginnings all the way to its impact on, well, ecosystems around the world.
Yeah, you know what always gets me? It's how a tiny molecule designed to target pain in our bodies can have such a wide range of effects. We're talking about cellular mechanisms and even the health of entire animal populations.
Exactly. It's incredible. So ready to jump in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. When did Diclofenac actually make its debut? And who were the masterminds behind it?
Well, we got to rewind back to the late 1960s, a time of some pretty major breakthroughs in the pharmaceutical world. Diclofenac was the brainchild of some brilliant scientists over at Ciba-Geigy, a Swiss company that eventually morphed into the pharmaceutical giant we know as Novartis.
Novartis, yeah, big name.
Huge. And the actual birth of the diclofenac molecule itself happened around 1969.
Okay, so back then, pain relief options already existed.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, aspirin, ibuprofen, things like that were around. So what was the gap that Diclofenac was trying to fill?
You're right, those early NSAIDs were definitely already on the scene. Aspirin, ibuprofen. But they weren't perfect, especially when it came to long-term use. The impact on the stomach was a big concern.
Yeah, makes sense. So there was this constant push to find something better, something potentially gentler on the digestive system.
Exactly.
And that's where Diclofenac enters the picture. So when did it actually become available to people who were, desperate for some relief?
Well, diclofenac hit the market in Europe first. We're talking the early to mid-1970s. Its journey to the U.S. took a bit longer, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Actually, the FDA approvals you sent paint a pretty clear picture of a gradual rollout of different diclofenac formulations. Like in October 2000, they approved a 3% topical gel, but for a skin condition called actinic keratosis.
Interesting. So not for pain relief right away.
Right. It seems that that came a bit later. Then in January 2007, there's the 1.3% topical patch for acute minor injury pain, and the 1% topical gel, the one that's super popular for arthritis pain and available over the counter now. Well, that one got the green light in October 2007, specifically for osteoarthritis in certain joints.
Wow. So it's been this sort of step-by-step introduction over decades targeting all sorts of different needs.
It has. And then there's the oral powder approved in 2009, specifically for migraines. Talk about versatility.
It really is quite versatile.
Yeah.
So let's break down those uses a bit more. What can diclofenac actually be used for therapeutically? Sounds like it tackles way more than just one type of pain.
Oh, absolutely. The range of approved uses for diclofenac is vast, and it all boils down to its ability to tackle both pain and inflammation. So let's start with the systemic formulations. You know, the tablets, capsules, injections, suppositories, those are the big guns for chronic inflammatory conditions like osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and ankylosing spondylitis.
Right, so conditions that cause long-term pain and inflammation.
Exactly. But they're also essential for managing acute issues. Like if you have a sudden flare-up of gout tendinitis or bursitis, and of course they're used for general pain relief in so many situations.
Like after surgery.
Oh yeah, after surgery for sure. Muscle and joint injuries, headaches, dental pain, even menstrual cramps, you name it.
Wow, it really does cover a lot.
It does. And the intravenous formulation. That's usually reserved for more severe pain, like what you might experience in a hospital setting. Often it's used alongside opioid medications for extra pain control.
Makes sense. And we can't forget about that potassium powder formulation, specifically designed for acute migraine attacks. Fast-acting relief is the goal there.
Fast-acting relief for sure. Now let's switch gears and talk about the topical forms. Those seem to be all about targeting specific areas.
Yeah, the gels, solutions, patches, they're all about delivering the medication right where it hurts.
Exactly. Localized relief. So the 1% gel and the stronger topical solutions are mainly for osteoarthritis pain in specific joints. We're talking hands, wrists, elbows, knees, ankles, feet.
So if you have arthritis in your hip or your shoulder, the gel might not be the best option.
Well, it's important to point out that the gel hasn't actually been evaluated for effectiveness on the spine, hip, or shoulder.
Oh, interesting. So it might work, but the research isn't there yet.
Right. Now, for acute pain from minor sprains, strains, and bruises, that's where the patch comes in.
Mm.
And remember that 3% gel, that one's actually for something completely different. It's used to treat actinic keratosis, a precancerous skin condition.
Right, so it's not for pain relief at all in that case.
Not at all.
And then there's the eye drops. I mean, who would have thought?
It's amazing. Diclofenac even comes as an ophthalmic formulation for managing inflammation and pain in the eyes. It's used after cataract surgery and other eye procedures to reduce inflammation and prevent swelling.
And it can even help control pupil size during eye surgery. That's wild.
It is. Plus, it can provide relief from pain and light sensitivity for certain inflammatory conditions that affect the front of the eye.
It's incredible how one drug can be used in so many different ways. So what's the secret sauce here? What's going on at the cellular level that allows diclofenac to be so versatile?
Well, the magic lies in how diclofenac interacts with these special enzymes in our bodies called cyclooxygenase, or COX enzymes for short. And there are two main types we need to focus on, COX1 and COX2. Diclofenac basically inhibits both of them, but it has a slight preference for COX2 over COX1.
Okay, so what do these COX enzymes actually do?
So imagine COX2 as a little factory that produces these hormone-like substances called prostaglandins, and it sets up shop wherever there's injury or inflammation.
Okay, so prostaglandins are like the troublemakers causing pain and swelling.
They're the key players, for sure, causing pain, swelling, redness, the whole shebang. So when diclofenac comes along and blocks COX2, it basically shuts down the factory and reduces those inflammatory signals.
Ah, so that's how it relieves pain and inflammation. Makes sense.
Now, COX1, that's a different story. It's more of a maintenance worker, keeping things running smoothly throughout the body. One of its biggest jobs is protecting the lining of our stomachs.
Okay, so it's kind of like a bodyguard for our stomachs.
Exactly. And it also plays a role in how our blood platelets function. But here's the catch. When diclofenac inhibits COX1, it can mess with these protective processes, and that's why we see an increased risk of those nasty gastrointestinal side effects, like ulcers and bleeding.
Right, because it's interfering with the stomach's bodyguard.
Precisely. Plus, it affects how platelets work, potentially leading to bleeding issues. But there's another layer to this COX1, COX2 story. Yeah, you see this preference diclofenac has for inhibiting COX2 over COX1. It can disrupt the balance between two crucial substances, prostacyclin and thromboxane A2. Now, prostacyclin, mainly produced by COX2, is the good guy. It keeps blood vessels relaxed and prevents clots.
Okay, so prostacyclin is like a traffic cop, keeping everything flowing smoothly.
Perfect analogy. Now, thromboxane A2, mostly produced by COX1 in platelets, is the troublemaker. It constricts blood vessels and encourages clotting. And when diclofenac tips the scales in favor of thromboxane A2, well, that's a recipe for cardiovascular problems.
I see. So it's like diclofenac is unintentionally giving the bad guy the upper hand.
Exactly. And that's a big reason why its cardiovascular risk profile is somewhat similar to drugs that specifically target COX2, like those COX2 inhibitors.
Right, those COX2 inhibitors have been in the news for their cardiovascular risks.
They have. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds on cardiovascular risk, let's talk about those different diclofenac formulations. You know how they impact how the drug gets delivered and the potential for side effects?
Yeah, those different formulations seem like they're designed to get the drug where it's needed most while minimizing the impact on the rest of the body, like the topical forms. When you apply a gel, a solution, or a patch directly to the skin, it's not like swallowing a pill. It's a much more targeted approach.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of topical formulations. Only a small fraction of the drug actually enters your bloodstream. For the 1% gel, it's estimated that only about 6% of the dose makes it into your system compared to taking it orally.
Wow, so it's really staying put where you apply it.
It is, and that localized action allows the diclofenac to concentrate in the tissues right under the application site, like the synovial fluid in a joint. You get pain relief, but with a much lower chance of those widespread side effects, especially the gastrointestinal ones.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And they've even come up with foam formulations to make it easier to apply over larger areas.
It's all about making it as user-friendly as possible.
So what about the oral forms? Those obviously get into the bloodstream.
They do. And for oral formulations, we've got options like delayed release and extended release tablets and capsules. These are pretty clever because they control when and how the drug is released into your system.
So it's not just a sudden burst of medication.
Nope. It's more controlled, which can help optimize its effectiveness and potentially reduce some side effects. We also have faster-acting potassium salts. Those are absorbed quickly, which is great for sudden intense pain or a migraine attack.
Right, when you need relief ASAP.
Exactly. Then there are combo pills where diclofenac teams up with a gastroprotective agent like misoprostol that aims to counter the risk of stomach problems. And we can't forget about solumatrix technology.
Soul Matrix, what's that?
Think of it as creating super tiny particles of diclofenac. This allows for effective pain relief with lower oral doses, meaning your overall exposure to the drug is reduced.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of effort has gone into figuring out the best way to deliver this drug. Now, you mentioned off-label uses earlier. What does that even mean in the context of diclofenac?
Off-label use basically means a doctor is prescribing a drug for a condition or in a way that hasn't gotten the official stamp of approval from regulatory agencies like the FDA or the EMA. It doesn't mean it's wrong or illegal. It's more about using a drug for something other than its specifically approved uses.
Got it. So it's like thinking outside the box a bit.
In a way, yeah. And while our sources don't give us specifics on current off-label uses for diclofenac, I bet it's been used for other conditions over time. I mean, it's a powerful anti-inflammatory and pain reliever.
Any sense?
Historically, we've seen it mentioned for things like juvenile arthritis before specific pediatric formulations were approved. Acute shoulder pain, sciatic pain, general backache, certain types of muscle inflammation, tennis elbow, even potentially for preventing migraines.
And there's a specific formulation for acute migraine treatment, right?
There is. So these off-label uses often come down to a doctor's professional judgment. They're applying their knowledge of how the drug works to similar conditions. But it's super important to remember that the evidence for these off-label uses might not be as strong as for the approved indications.
Right, so it's a bit more of a gray area.
Exactly. Now, how familiar are you with other common pain relievers like ibuprofen and naproxen?
Oh, I've definitely encountered those over the counter and in prescriptions.
Well, diclofenac is generally considered a heavy hitter in the NSAI world. Some studies even suggest it might offer better pain relief than ibuprofen or naproxen in certain situations.
So it's strong stuff.
It is. And this is a huge, but this increased potency comes with a trade-off. Diclofenac has a less favorable cardiovascular safety profile compared to naproxen and ibuprofen.
That's concerning.
It is something to consider. Now, when it comes to topical diclofenac, it seems to be as effective as other topical NSAIDs. And for localized osteoarthritis pain, it might even be as effective as oral NSAIDs with a much better safety profile, thanks to that minimal systemic absorption we talked about.
Right, so it's all about weighing the risks and benefits. Now let's shift gears completely and talk about how diclofenac is actually made. What's involved in creating this molecule on an industrial scale?
Well, diclofenac is a relatively straightforward organic molecule, and its synthesis is pretty well established in the pharmaceutical industry. There are two main routes that have been used historically. One is the classic method, been around for ages.
The Old Faithful.
Got it. It typically starts with phenol, a basic building block in chemistry. This phenol goes through a nitration reaction to create paranitrophenol. Then this intermediate product is reduced to form 4-aminophenol. This step can be done using either catalytic methods like hydrogenation or chemical methods involving reducing agents.
So a bit of chemistry magic happening there.
It is. And finally, this 4-aminophenol gets acetylated, meaning an acetyl group is added using acetic anhydride, and voila, we have diclofenac.
So that's the classic method. What are some of the downsides?
Well, while it's been reliable, the classic approach has some baggage. It uses some pretty harsh chemicals, strong acids, nitrating agents, various catalysts to make the reactions happen. Plus, it tends to create waste products that need to be dealt with carefully and in an environmentally friendly way.
So not exactly green chemistry.
Not really, but luckily there's the modern process.
So how does that one differ?
Well, in recent years, newer synthetic routes have been developed to improve on the classic method. These focus on getting higher yields of diclofenac, making the synthesis more efficient, using less hazardous reagents, and improving what we call atom economy.
Atom economy.
It basically means maximizing how much of the starting materials end up in the final product and minimizing waste. Plus, some of these newer processes explore continuous flow chemistry, where reactions happen in a continuous stream instead of traditional batch reactors. It's like an assembly line for molecules.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, our sources don't give us the nitty-gritty details of a specific modern process.
It's a bit of a black box, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, once they've made the diclofenac molecule, how do they make sure it's the real deal and not contaminated?
That's where quality control comes in, right? It's got to be
Correct.
super rigorous in the pharmaceutical world.
Oh, absolutely. And for diclofenac, it involves a whole battery of tests at every stage of production. First, you've got to confirm that the substance is actually diclofenac and not some imposter. That's where identity tests come in. They can use spectroscopic methods, which look at how the substance interacts with light chromatographic techniques like HPLC or thin layer chromatography to separate components, and even specific chemical tests.
So they're really putting it through the ringer.
They are. And then there are purity tests to detect and measure any impurities. Chromatographic methods are popular here, along with limit tests for specific impurities that might be a concern.
So they're checking for anything that shouldn't be there.
Exactly. Now, what about making sure the final product, like a tablet, has the right amount of the active ingredient?
Yeah, that seems crucial.
That's the job of the assay. It determines the exact percentage of active diclofenac in both the raw ingredient and the finished product, whether it's a tablet, a gel, or an injection. They'll use techniques like titration, which involves reacting the substance with a solution of known concentration, or good old HPLC. And of course, there are strict limits set by official pharmacopoeias like the European Pharmacopoeia or the US Pharmacopoeia to ensure consistency and that the drug will actually work.
So they're making sure you're getting what you paid for.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the amount of active ingredient. They also need to make sure that a tablet will actually dissolve in your body and release the drug for absorption.
Right. Otherwise, it's just going to pass right through you.
Exactly. So that's where dissolution testing comes in. They simulate the conditions in your stomach and intestines to see how quickly and how much of the drug is released over time.
So they're mimicking what happens in your gut.
They are. And the conditions of the test, like the pH of the solution and how much it's shaken, can be changed depending on whether it's an immediate relief product that's designed to dissolve quickly or a delayed release product that dissolves later on.
Clever. So they're fine-tuning the test based on the specific formulation.
Exactly. And this dissolution testing is key for comparing different batches of the drug, and especially for comparing generic versions to the original brand name product. It's all about proving bioequivalence, meaning they should behave the same way in the body.
Right. So you know you're getting a comparable product, whether it's generic or brand name.
Precisely. Now, are you ready for a few more quality control tests?
Hit me with them.
Okay, so depending on the diclofenac formulation and the final product, they might test for water content limits on heavy metals, the pH of solutions, the clarity and color of liquids, microbial limits to ensure there's no harmful bacteria, and even residual solvents from manufacturing. It's really comprehensive.
Wow, they don't miss a thing.
They try not to. And these certified reference standards, they're highly pure samples from organizations like the USP or the European Pharmacopoeia. They're essential for accurate and reliable testing. And remember, sticking to these pharmacopoeial standards isn't just a good practice, it's a legal requirement in many countries. It's all about guaranteeing that the diclofenac people get is safe, effective, and consistently high quality.
That's really reassuring to know. Now let's dive into the regulatory world. How is diclofenac regulated globally?
Pharma regulations. Oh, that's a whole other beast. It's a complex global landscape with rules and processes varying from one place to another. But big players like the FDA in the US and the EMA in Europe, they're the ones setting the standards and controlling which drugs can be sold and how they can be used.
Right, they're the gatekeepers.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the specific approvals for diclofenac, the formulations that are available and what they're approved to treat, can be different between agencies and across different countries.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Not at all.
Can you give us some examples of significant regulatory actions or milestones specifically related to diclofenac?
Absolutely. Well, we've already talked about those initial FDA approvals for various formulations, each with its own purpose. But beyond those initial approvals, both the FDA and the EMA have issued important warnings and guidance about the potential risks of diclofenac.
Like red flags to watch out for.
Exactly. We're talking about those gastrointestinal problems, the cardiovascular risks, and the possibility of liver damage.
So they're not taking those risks lightly.
Not at all. Like after diclofenac had been on the market for a while, reports started coming in about serious liver reactions. That led to warnings about monitoring liver function in certain patients and stopping the drug if there are any abnormalities.
Because they're constantly evaluating and adjusting based on new information.
Exactly. And both agencies have issued warnings about pregnancy, especially the potential for premature closure of a vital blood vessel in the fetus called the ductus arteriosus. So diclofenac is generally not recommended during the third trimester.
Right, because the risks outweigh the benefits at that point. And the EMA has taken specific actions as well, hasn't it?
Yes, the EMA has played a crucial role in harmonizing safety information and responding to any safety concerns across the European Union. When a potential safety signal pops up for a medication, the EMA often conducts these thorough reviews and issues recommendations that apply across the whole EU.
So they're like the safety watchdogs for the entire EU.
That's a good way to put it. For instance, in 2018, the EMA completed a review of all medicines containing diclofenac. They were specifically looking at the cardiovascular risks. And while they did reinforce existing warnings, they also confirmed that various diclofenac products, including a 4% diclofenac sodium spray gel, could stay on the market across multiple European countries.
Interesting. So it wasn't a complete ban.
No, it wasn't. And this really shows how medications like diclofenac are constantly scrutinized and evaluated even after they've been available for years.
It's like they're always under the microscope. Now, this regulatory attention naturally brings us to controversies and legal issues. What are some of the major concerns that have popped up around diclofenac?
The main concerns really revolve around those three key areas we've touched on. The risk to the cardiovascular system, the potential for gastrointestinal problems, and the issues with liver toxicity.
Right. Those keep coming up. So let's unpack the cardiovascular risks a bit more.
Okay, so as we talked about earlier, diclofenac's effects on prostaglandin balance can increase the risk of serious cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. There was this big study published in the British Medical Journal in 2018 that used data from Danish national registries. It found that starting treatment with diclofenac was linked to a much higher rate of major adverse cardiovascular events compared to people not taking diclofenac, and also compared to those starting treatment with paracetamol, ibuprofen, or naproxen.
So in that study, diclofenac seemed to have a worse track record than other pain relievers.
In that study, yes. And on top of that, several meta-analyses, which combine data from multiple studies, have indicated that the cardiovascular risk with diclofenac is pretty similar to that seen with selective QX2 inhibitors. You know, that other class of NSAIDs known for their cardiovascular risks?
So it's not looking good for diclofenac's heart health reputation.
It's a definite concern. Interestingly, naproxen often seems to have a more neutral cardiovascular risk profile in many of these comparisons.
That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But those cardiovascular risks are definitely worrisome.
Yeah.
What about the risks to the gastrointestinal system?
Diclofenac, like a lot of traditional NSAIDs, can increase the risk of upper GI problems like ulcers and bleeding. That same 2018 BMJ study we talked about also looked into this. They found that starting diclofenac was linked to a much higher risk of upper GI bleeding compared to not taking any drug, and also compared to starting with ibuprofen or paracetamol. Interestingly, the risk with diclofenac in that study was actually similar to naproxen.
So similar GI risks for diclofenac and naproxen.
According to that study, yes. Now, a few things can make those GI complications more likely. Older age, a history of ulcers or GI bleeding, using NSAIDs for a long time, taking higher doses, using other medications like corticosteroids, blood thinners, aspirin, or certain antidepressants.
So the combination of factors that can really increase the risk.
Right. But it's super important to stress that topical diclofenac has a much lower risk of these systemic side effects because so little of the drug actually gets into your bloodstream.
Right. It's mainly staying put where you apply it.
Exactly.
Now let's move on to that third major concern, liver toxicity. How serious of an issue is that with diclofenac?
Okay, so diclofenac has been linked to this rare but potentially serious condition called idiosyncratic drug-induced liver injury, DILI for short. While it's not uncommon to see small elevations in liver enzyme levels, in some patients taking diclofenac, clinically significant liver injury is much less frequent.
So it's not a common problem, but when it happens, it can be bad.
Exactly. Estimates suggest it might only happen in a few cases per 100,000 prescriptions. But even though it's relatively rare, diclofenac is often mentioned in reports and studies about drug-induced liver injury. It's considered one of the NSAIDs most commonly linked to this type of reaction.
So it's on the radar for liver problems.
It is. This liver injury usually shows up as acute hepatitis, often within the first few weeks or months of starting the medication. And while many cases clear up once the drug is stopped, severe outcomes like acute liver failure requiring a transplant or even death have been reported.
Wow, that's serious.
It is. That's why the prescribing information for diclofenac has warnings about monitoring liver function, especially during long-term use.
So regular checkups are key. Now we need to talk about another controversy surrounding diclofenac, its impact on the environment.
This is a tragic chapter in the story of diclofenac. It involves its devastating effect on vulture populations in South Asia. Back in the early 1990s, populations of several gyps, vulture species on the Indian subcontinent started declining rapidly. Within about a decade, their numbers had plummeted by 95 to 99%. These vultures used to be incredibly numerous, tens of millions of them.
That's a catastrophic decline.
It was. And the culprit? Widespread veterinary use of diclofenac in livestock. When these treated animals died, vultures would feed on their carcasses and ingest the diclofenac. Turns out vultures are super sensitive to this drug. It causes rapid kidney failure and death.
So it was unintentional poisoning.
Sadly, yes.
What were the consequences of this massive vulture die-off?
The fallout was huge. Vultures are nature's cleanup crew. They efficiently dispose of animal carcasses and help prevent disease spread. Without them, there was a massive surge in feral dog populations, which aren't as efficient at scavenging. This led to a public health crisis with a spike in rabies transmission, causing tens of thousands of human deaths and billions of dollars in economic costs. It also impacted sanitation and potentially increased the risk of other diseases. Plus, it had a huge cultural impact on the Parsi community in India, whose traditional sky burial practices rely on vultures to dispose of bodies. This whole tragedy is a stark reminder of the unintended consequences even beneficial pharmaceuticals can have. It highlights the need for a One Health approach that considers the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health when we assess and regulate drugs.
It's a truly heartbreaking story and a powerful lesson. Now let's talk about diclofenac's economic and market impact. It's obviously widely used, so it must have a significant footprint.
It does. The global market for diclofenac, including the raw ingredient and all the finished products, is massive. It's a multi-billion-dollar segment within the larger market for NSAIDs and pain meds. Estimates vary, but we're looking at a market worth billions.
Billions with a B.
Absolutely. And projections suggest continued growth over the next decade. Some reports even estimate the total global market for diclofenac could reach over $6 billion by 2027.
So what's fueling this growth?
Several factors are at play here. The rising prevalence of conditions like osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, more sports-related injuries due to active lifestyles, the aging global population, the increasing cases of chronic pain, and the general upward trend in healthcare spending worldwide. Plus, some topical diclofenac formulations are now available over the counter in certain regions, making them more accessible. And of course, we can't forget the expanding healthcare markets in emerging economies.
Right, those emerging markets are a huge factor.
They are.
Are there any factors that could put the brakes on this growth?
Yes, definitely. The well-known side effects of systemic diclofenacs, especially the risks to the heart, the stomach, and the liver, are a big deterrent for both patients and doctors. Plus, there's increased competition from other NSAIDs and pain medications. Patents expiring on some formulations are leading to cheaper generic alternatives, and there's a growing demand for safer pain relief options.
So it's not all smooth sailing for diclofenac.
No, it's not. It's a constant battle to stay relevant. And the development and marketing of those different formulations, especially the topical ones, have played a big role in maintaining diclofenac's market presence.
Right, because those topical products offer a way to get pain relief without as many of the systemic risks.
Exactly. They're a more attractive option for certain patients and conditions.
Now, how has diclofenac's overall clinical profile, with its efficacy and its risks, influenced clinical treatment guidelines for pain management?
Diclofenac's proven effectiveness in treating various types of pain and inflammation, along with its well-documented risks, has significantly shaped clinical practice guidelines for pain management. The recognition of topical diclofenac's improved safety profile for localized musculoskeletal pain has led to recommendations for its use as a potential first-line treatment in appropriate cases.
So it's seen as a safer option for certain types of pain.
For localized pain, yes. But on the flip side, the clear evidence of increased cardiovascular risk with systemic diclofenac has resulted in strong warnings and even contraindications for its use in patients with pre-existing heart conditions in many treatment guidelines. These guidelines often stress using the lowest effective dose of systemic diclofenac for the shortest possible time, careful patient selection, and considering safer alternatives like naproxen, especially for patients with cardiovascular risk factors. The story of diclofenac really showcases a broader shift in pain management towards a more personalized approach that carefully weighs the benefits of pain relief against the individual patient's specific risk factors and other health conditions.
So it's about tailoring treatment to the individual.
Absolutely.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dives into diclofenac, I want to touch on its broader cultural and societal impact. It's clearly had an impact far beyond just treating pain.
That's for sure. The environmental catastrophe involving vultures in South Asia is perhaps the most profound and far-reaching societal impact of diclofenac. It really shows how interconnected human actions and ecological systems are. The near extinction of these crucial scavenger species had devastating consequences for public health, sanitation, and even cultural practices in those regions. It's a powerful reminder that we need to take a One Health perspective when developing, evaluating, and using pharmaceutical products.
Right, considering the health of humans, animals, and the environment as a whole.
Exactly. In current clinical practice, diclofenac's potency remains a valuable tool for managing pain for many people. But those cardiovascular risks mean we need to be cautious and do a thorough risk-benefit analysis for each patient. And the development of topical diclofenac has been a huge step forward, offering a more localized treatment with a much lower risk of systemic side effects. Overall, the journey of diclofenac is a complex and multifaceted story. It highlights both the potential benefits and the potential harms of a powerful medication, and emphasizes the need to carefully consider its use in light of individual patient needs and the broader societal and environmental consequences.
It's a fascinating and cautionary tale. So as we conclude our deep dive, we've uncovered the story of a potent pain reliever with a wide range of uses, but also one that comes with significant risks, especially to the cardiovascular system, and in a uniquely tragic way, the environment. The ongoing efforts to create safer formulations and the continuous regulatory oversight really underscore the constant need to balance the benefits of this drug with its potential for harm.
You know, it's amazing to me that even a medication as common as diclofenac has this deep and intricate story to tell. It's full of unexpected twists and turns and far-reaching consequences, from its action at a molecular level all the way to its impact on global ecosystems. It really makes you think about the full spectrum of effects, both intended and unintended, of the medications we use, and the responsibility that comes with understanding those effects.
That's a truly thought-provoking takeaway. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been an eye-opener for sure.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to explore these complex issues.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay well.